A fully loaded train carrying $200,000 worth of whiskey rolls out of Denver on a routine run. By dawn, it's gone and nobody could figure out how. 3 o'clock in the morning, November 3rd, 1901. The Denver and Rio Grande Western locomotive sits idle on a siding near Willow Creek, Colorado. I've read the dispatcher's notes myself, meticulous clinical entries that suddenly stop mid-sentence. The train was carrying 44 barrels of aged whiskey, not fancy stuff, understand, working-class bourbon, the kind you'd find in saloons from here to the Mississippi. But the volume made it valuable. In today's money, we're talking north of $4 million. Let me back up, this wasn't some armored treasure shipment. This was whiskey, liquid, heavy, and absolutely not the kind of cargo you'd think twice about. That's what made it perfect. The shipment had been loaded the previous afternoon, bound for distributor in Pueblo. Standard run, standard guards, standard everything. Nobody was expecting trouble because, well, who steals an entire trainload of booze? The answer, as it turned out, was someone with a very specific plan. The men guarding that train were seasoned railroad security, 2 of them. They knew the route, knew the stops, knew what could go wrong, or thought they did. Around midnight, the locomotive was parked on a siding, a temporary stop for water and coal, standard procedure. The crew went inside a small station house to warm up, get coffee. It was cold that November. Nobody wanted to stay outside longer than necessary. When they came back out, and this is where the logbook gets interesting, the train was still there. The locomotive, the cars, everything, but the cargo car containing those 44 barrels, it was gone, not damaged, not broken into, simply detached and vanished into the Colorado night like it had never existed. The guard stood there, staring at the coupling point, trying to make sense of what they weren't seeing. The railroad company's response was swift and frankly embarrassed. You don't lose an entire car of merchandise and walk away quietly. They contacted the territorial marshal's office within hours. By noon, every lawman in southern Colorado was looking for a train car full of whiskey. You'd think that'd be easy to hide. A freight car isn't exactly inconspicuous. But here's the thing, nobody found it. Not that day, not that week. The car simply ceased to exist in any official record. Theories started flying immediately. Some thought it was a rival railroad company, sabotage, industrial espionage. Others whispered about organized crime syndicates moving product to illegal stills. A few genuinely believed bandits had somehow pulled off the impossible, but none of those theories held up under scrutiny. There were no witnesses, no trail, no demand for ransom, nothing, just silence and a missing car. Here's what investigation eventually revealed, and I've pieced this together from court documents and railroad archives. The car hadn't been stolen. It had been moved, deliberately detached by someone with intimate knowledge of how trains worked. Someone who understood coupling mechanisms, who knew the exact moment the crew would step away, and who had transport waiting in the darkness. This wasn't opportunistic crime, this was choreographed. Suspicion eventually landed on a man named Frank Hanks, a former railroad employee with grudges and debts. Hanks had been fired 6 months prior, a dispute over wages and working conditions. He knew the Denver and Rio Grande line inside and out. He knew the siding at Willow Creek. He knew when trains would be vulnerable, and he had connections to people who moved stolen goods, but proving it, that was another matter entirely. The investigation dragged on for months. Marshals followed leads into remote canyons and hidden valleys. They questioned saloon keepers, freight handlers, anyone who might have seen a railroad car being dismantled or sold for scrap. Some whiskey did turn up, barrels showing up in backwater saloons across Colorado and New Mexico, but never enough to trace back to a single operation. The booze had been distributed deliberately, scattered like breadcrumbs across the territory. What made this heist remarkable wasn't the violence or the drama. There was none. What made it remarkable was the simplicity and the audacity. Whoever pulled this off didn't need guns or explosives. They needed patience, knowledge, and the willingness to act in that narrow window when attention was elsewhere. They understood the vulnerability of a system that hadn't yet evolved to prevent exactly this kind of theft. Frank Hanks was eventually arrested on circumstantial evidence, but the case never made it to trial. He died in custody under unclear circumstances, taking whatever knowledge he had to the grave. No charges were ever formally filed, no one was ever convicted for the theft, and that railroad car, it was never recovered. Some believe it was dismantled and sold as scrap metal. Others think parts of it still exist somewhere in the Colorado wilderness, rusting quietly under decades of dust and neglect. The Great Whiskey Heist of 1901 faded from public memory almost immediately. No treasure recovered, no dramatic trial, no captured mastermind. Just a missing train car and a mystery that settled into the footnotes of Colorado railroad history. Insurance claims were eventually settled. The railroad moved on, life continued. But for anyone paying attention, it was a masterclass in timing, inside knowledge, and the art of disappearing in plain sight. What we're left with is a heist that teaches us something fundamental about crime and planning. The biggest thefts aren't always the most famous ones. Sometimes the most perfectly executed crimes are the ones nobody remembers because they're too quiet, too clean, too efficient to make for dramatic storytelling. This one had no heroes, no villains, no redemptive arc. Just a moment of vulnerability, someone ready to exploit it. And a trainload of whiskey that vanished into the American West. The railroad industry learned from this. Security protocols tightened, procedures changed, trains were never left unattended in quite the same way again. But by then, the damage was done. 44 barrels of whiskey had proven that even a system designed to protect valuable cargo had blind spots, and someone had found them. Subscribe, there's a new unsolved heist or forgotten crime waiting every week, and you won't want to miss the ones that rewrite history.